from stalling.
We definitely could have had a much more catastrophic outcome had the airplane actually stalled.
Starting the APU.
Sullenberger's quick thinking made sure the plane's complex computer system kept working. It gave him an automated safety net, so he'd have the best chance to do the nearly impossible.
We're going to be in the Hudson.
It was a combination of a good crew and a good airplane.
Let's go. Put the flaps out.
The captain had the presence of mind, for instance, just before they were about to land, a couple of 100 feet in the air, to turn to the first officer and ask,
Got any ideas?
Actually, not.
They were both coordinating right up to the end, and that's what we like to see.
Skill, training, and the aircraft's very design combined to save the lives of 155 people. But investigators still want to know how birds crippled two highly advanced jet engines, and if they can stop it from happening again. 8 days after the crash, investigators are finally able to examine the engines in detail. Richard Dolbear has spent much of his career studying collisions between birds and airplanes.
When aircraft strikes a bird, generally there's not much left of the bird, particularly if that bird goes through the engine.
The engines are analyzed piece by piece to try and figure out exactly what happened 3,000 feet above New York.
Let's look inside.
We expose the engine surfaces to a black light. Proteins from many tissues will fluoresce with a black light. Much of the tissue was already gone, but many of the proteins stayed on the surfaces of the engine.
Look at that.
Deep in the right engine, investigators find about a cup of charred remains.
Most of the remains found were just muscle tissue, bone fragments, and minuscule feather remains. I was able to find about 29 samples in one engine and 14 in the other.
But the engines aren't the only part of the plane that's been damaged.
Birds.
Whoa! The aircraft hit many birds. So we found evidence on the wings and on the flaps and on the fuselage, but the plane can still fly when that occurs.
The threat posed by bird strikes is well known.
Bird strikes are a much bigger problem than the general public realizes. In the last 20 years, there have been approximately 210 aircraft that have been destroyed because of collisions with birds.
This Boeing 757 ingested a crow while taking off from Manchester, England, later landing safely. In 2008 alone, there were 4 dramatic accidents. A Boeing 747 sucked a kestrel into one of its engines. The crew aborted takeoff and survived. The plane was ruined. This jet ingested pelicans into both engines, and one ended up in the cockpit. Repairs cost $2 million. The engine of an MD-10 was severely damaged by a gadwall. The repair cost was $900,000. And 5 people were killed when this Cessna smashed into at least one pelican. More than 200 people have died in bird strike accidents since 1988. The problem could get worse because there are more birds out there.
By restricting the use of pesticides that were hazardous to birds, such as DDT, we've seen a tremendous rebound in the populations of bird species. A remarkable increase in the Canada geese that are resident, non-migratory birds. Nationwide, the population has grown from about 1 million to about 4 million.
At LaGuardia, one of the airport's biggest problems is a year-round goose colony on nearby Rikers Island.
From the year 2002 to 2004, there were 8 Canada goose strikes at LaGuardia Airport. It involved birds either on the airport or right off of the airport. One of those strikes almost caused a plane to crash, and it was a very close call.
For the past several years, airport officials have rounded up hundreds of geese from Rikers Island and euthanized them. It's controversial, but should be effective.
So, where did these birds come from?
If the geese that hit US Airways Flight 1549 were local, they can be controlled. Investigators need to know more about them.
The remains that we did find were so small that we couldn't really tell what type of birds. We enlisted the help of the Smithsonian Institution. They can take remains, even very small remains, small pieces of feathers or flesh or whatever, and they can identify them.
The hope is that DNA analysis of the remains will not only confirm the bird's species, but also offer clues as to where they came from. While they wait for answers, investigators turn to answering the question of how a few birds forced a 68-ton jet from the sky. Before they can be used in a passenger jet, engines undergo rigorous testing to prove they can perform under extreme conditions. The tests include ingesting frozen bird carcasses. The CFM turbofan engines that power the A320 passed those tests and were certified in 1996.
The large bird test required for the CFM engine is shooting a 4-pound bird from an air cannon into the engine, which is running at near full power.
To pass, the engines don't have to keep running. They only have to stay together, which they did on Sullenberger's plane.
Well, the engines did not experience what we call uncontained failures. No large chunks of fan blades or anything flew out through the cowls to hurt people inside the airplane.
Fan blades are always the most interesting part to look at, and they often tell quite a story.
A series of fan blades throughout the engine compress incoming air until it's ignited in the core, creating thrust. Ingested birds can wreak havoc on this process.
When a fan blade of an engine fails, it causes a lot of continuing damage. In this particular case, all the fan blades were there. They suffered severe damage, but none were broken.
An analysis of the engines shows that while the primary fan blades survived the impact, the delicate machinery inside the cores of both engines did not.
Uh-oh. We got one roll, both of them rolling back.
Once we went into the engine itself, into the core, we determined that there was significant damage. When a bird gets ingested into the core, it is such a large mass compared to these blades that it does a lot of damage to them.
The birds ingested into Flight 1549
Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Cactus 1549.
ripped apart the engine's compressors. Metal shards from these broken compressors were sucked deep into the cores of both engines, shutting them down.
We've hit birds, we've lost thrust in both engines.
When DNA results come back from the Smithsonian Institution, investigators finally understand why Flight 1549 lost both its engines. The birds that struck Sullenberger and Skiles' aircraft were adult Canada geese. They were far larger than anything the engines were ever tested for.
Because of that analysis, we know that these birds ingested each probably weighed about 10 pounds.
The tests also confirmed that as many as 4 large birds had hit Flight 1549's engines. It was simply too much for them to handle.
Rarely do birds get ingested into the core of the engine. Rarely does an engine ingest the bird and then stop running completely. That's a very rare event.
Ignition start.
What makes this one even rarer is that both engines ingested birds and both shut down.
We're going to be in the Hudson.
The DNA test also proves that the geese involved in this accident were not the local geese that LaGuardia has worked so hard to manage.
These were geese that had been in northern Canada during the preceding summer. They were migratory geese.
The collision between the migrating geese and Flight 1549 happened 7 kilometers from the airport. It means that none of the existing programs for reducing the number of birds would have prevented the collision. It also means that what happened to that flight could happen again, unless a way can be found to keep birds and planes apart.
Romeo Whiskey 2-1, radar contact, Walsh, report 20 DME southeast Melbourne.
Every year, about 2 million planes pass over New York's airspace.
Most people do not appreciate the problems that birds can cause to aircraft. They don't realize how a small, seemingly insignificant organism in relation to the size of an aircraft can cause these kinds of catastrophic failures.
The airline industry needs to find solutions to bird strikes. Placing screens in front of the engines is one of the most obvious answers, but there are serious drawbacks.
Screens can fall off, screens can break, and then they would be ingested into the engine, causing similar damage or more catastrophic damage.
Screens can also introduce turbulence to the airflow, which can starve the engines of air, causing them to fail. Winter weather is also a serious problem for engine screens.
A screen is a perfect ice builder, and it will accrete ice very quickly in icing conditions.
A more promising solution is already being tested in several American cities, including New York. At John F. Kennedy Airport, specialized radar is sweeping the skies looking for birds near planes. Most airports are equipped with radar that sends out radio waves that simply bounce off objects in the sky. Typically, only large objects are seen, and most of this information isn't passed along to air traffic controllers.
The fact is that their scopes would be cluttered with things. Tall masts from ships, for instance, would pop up on their radar as low targets. The clutter, in fact, would interfere with air traffic control, and that's not a good thing.
But now, finely calibrated avian radar is being tested at JFK. It can distinguish items the size of hummingbirds. If any birds are detected moving through flight paths, crews could be alerted.
I would love to see bird radar technology. The key would be how to incorporate that without increasing workload to an already stressed controller.
Tests continue, but widespread use of avian radar is still years away.
Cactus 1549, runway 4, clear for takeoff.
Cactus 1549, clear for takeoff.
Until then, collisions between birds and planes will continue. What the safe outcome of Flight 1549 proved is that right now, the best defense against this threat is a good team in the cockpit.
We had a very experienced flight crew with very good training.
My aircraft.
Your aircraft.
Get the QRH.
All your training that you've done, all the years that you've been flying the airplanes, it all just comes back to you when you need it.
My aircraft.
Sully and I worked together extremely well in this event. I knew what was in his mind, and he knew what was in my mind. We were both accomplishing our individual roles, but we had a knowledge of the whole situation.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left, heading 220.
220.
This event definitely puts things in perspective for you as a controller. One thing I appreciate more, the teamwork and how when you work together, you can pretty much accomplish whatever you need to accomplish.
Off to your right side is Teterboro Airport. You want to try and make Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
The landing in the Hudson took training and skill. It also took a bit of luck.
We had a very clear day. We had a perfect condition for the river. So there was just a series of really fortunate events that occurred that assisted this crew in landing successfully on the river.
Well, at the safety board, we don't really deal in miracles very often, but this event had a lot of things that came together at the right time and the right place. And so a lot of us are thinking, well, maybe we do have a miracle here.
What a view of the Hudson today.